We are now in session. Welcome to meeting 117 of the Standing House of Commons Committee on Official Languages. There is a card on the table. I would ask you to read carefully. It is there to prevent acoustic accidents. I would remind participants to wait until I have called on you to take the floor, and please to raise your hand. The clerk and I will organize the order of speakers as efficiently as possible. And please remember that you always speak through the chair. We are resuming our study on continuing education, the continuum of education in the minority languages, pursuant to Standing Order 1083F, and the motion passed by the committee on April 29th. I'd like to welcome the witnesses who are here with us today for the first hour, Mr. Éric Caron-Malenfant for Statistics Canada from the Demographic Centre. He's Assistant Director. And José Bégin, Deputy Head Statistician. Welcome, Mr. Caron-Malenfant. Welcome, Ms. Bégin. I believe this is the first time that you're appearing here. Yes. Well, it's a great committee, and we have a wonderful team with extraordinary members. I have a motion I'd like to move while we are in the public portion of the meeting. Could we have a bit more time so that we don't take time away from members? Yes, of course. Please remind me if it takes time. I have a motion to move as well. So once this hour is over, and just an explanation for people listening, on the notice of meeting, we had 1 hour set aside to hear witnesses and 1 hour set aside for the in-camera meeting. Mr. Godin? Yes, if we look at the notice of meeting, it does state that from 11 to 12 we would hear witnesses, and from 12 to 1 we would work in camera. So can we change that without unanimous consent, given that we do have witnesses and it's important for us to hear them? If the parties want to take some of their own time to move motions, they are free to do that, but they do need to use the time, or rather we do need to use the time as set out on the agenda we've received. Yes, the first hour will be for Statistics Canada. After that, we have an in-camera meeting scheduled, but it's up to members to do what they wish to do. And if you wish to remain in a public meeting to move the motions, that's up to the committee. To move to in-camera meeting or to stay public, do we need unanimous consent? Well, that question could be put quickly. It's the opposite. It takes unanimous consent to go in camera. But when the agenda is altered, do we need unanimous consent? Oh, we can do it if the committee wishes to. But how is the committee's wish expressed in parliamentary language? We can do it by majority vote. But shall we move ahead and hear Statistics Canada and then discuss this at the end of it? On this point, yes, we'll have presentations and questions, and then we'll have an hour, and we can take a few minutes out of that to talk about the motions. Before I suspend the meeting to go in camera, we will deal with what Mr. Beaulieu requested. Well, we still don't know whether there will be an extension or not. If you wouldn't mind taking the time to check and then tell us, because we are now taking time away from this. Right. When somebody has the floor before we adjourn, that is what happens. There are 2 microphones open at the moment. Please go ahead, Mr. Godin. Mr. Chairman, If I look at what we've done in the past, believing that we were in compliance with procedure, we took our speaking time during questions, our questioning time, to move motions. Now, what we're attempting to do is avoid encroaching on the testimony of our witnesses, and that's perfectly legitimate. And we're adapting the rules. As a parliamentarian, I feel that I've been hard done by because I have been forced to use my question time, and I was criticized for that by the opposing party. This is what I did when the minister was here. I hope you understand, Chair, that all I'm trying to achieve is to make sure that the rules are respected to the letter. And if I feel that my rights have been broached in any way, I will let you know. The committee has begun. We have Statistics Canada. Everyone is free to do what they wish with their questioning time. And even if I disliked what you chose to do with your questioning time, I would have to respect your right to do what you like with that time. If someone decides to move a motion or discuss it when they have the floor, I can't stop them. But now we're losing valuable time. I know that these are good questions, but we are encroaching on the time allotted to our witnesses. So can we now begin? I will extend so that we can have about an hour with our witnesses. I don't know which of you is going to begin. Ms. Bégin, please go ahead. I want to make sure that you have as much time as possible. Please go ahead, Ms. Bégin. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, first of all, we would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to contribute to your work on the continuum of education in the minority official language. As agents of Statistics Canada, we collect and disseminate statistical information to provide a detailed factual basis to implement programs relating to education in the minority official language across Canada, be it through the census, be it through administrative sources, or through investigations, in addition to existing questions on education and the linguistic characteristics of Canadians. Details on English instruction in Quebec and French education outside Canada in both primary and secondary levels were added to the 2021 census. New questions highlight the number of children eligible for education for instruction in the minority official language based on Section 23 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This has made it possible to produce a detailed geographic distribution of these groups and to determine the percentage of children already attending a minority language school. The 2021 census data showed that about 300,000 eligible children lived in Quebec, while 350,000 were in Ontario. However, the highest percentage of eligible children, 36%, was in New Brunswick. The results also showed that in Quebec, about 75% of eligible school-age children were attending or had attended a minority language school in Canada, compared to just under two-thirds in Canada outside Quebec. The census is one of the cornerstones of the data ecosystems Statistics Canada is currently establishing for children eligible for education in the minority official language. Given that the census paints a picture of households as they are on a census day, it's a snapshot. StatsCan has conducted an additional study showing that another 90,000 or so children are eligible because family members live in other households because of, for example, children in shared custody.
For example, the Elementary Secondary Education Survey is used to track the number of annual enrollments in minority language programs in Canada. One finding from this survey is that 260,000 children and teenagers were in a minority language education program in Canada during the 2022-2023 school year. Meanwhile, the open database of educational facilities includes information on the schools that offer minority language programs. Combining this database with census data revealed that 87% of eligible children in Canada live less than 10 kilometers from a minority school. The proximity of minority schools, along with the language spoken at home by parents, is one of the factors associated with instruction of eligible children in the minority official language. The first results from the survey on the official language minority population, which was conducted in 2022, will soon be added to the data ecosystem on children eligible for instruction in the minority official language. The data from this survey will cast light on parents' education's intentions for their eligible children and the reasons for their choice of language of instruction. The survey also included many questions that will provide information on the entire school path, from daycare to post-secondary, and on various other aspects of the situation of official language minorities. L'éventail de données de Statistique Canada qui nous semble d'intérêt pour vous.
The Statistics Canada data we feel would be of interest to your study also include the Canadian Survey on the Provision of Childcare Services, which has a question on the language of services offered, the Post-Secondary Student Information System, which can be combined with census data to determine the language of graduates, and the National Graduate Survey. Lastly, it should be noted that under the new Action Plan for Official Languages, we're working on assessing the feasibility of producing projections of the population of children eligible for instruction in the minority official language. The information Statistics Canada produces is available in a range of formats, such as analyses, tables, maps, and other visual tools. Some of our recent analyses on this topic focused on the characteristics of children eligible for instruction in the minority official language, the connection between language of instruction, bilingualism, and the languages used at work, and enrollment in immersion programs in Canada outside Quebec. Could you conclude, please? Yes. To conclude, Statistics Canada has many sources of information and analyses on levels of minority language education. It is actively working to add these to the data ecosystem to provide decision makers and stakeholders with evidence-based data. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Béjean. The first round of questions will come from all parties. Each party has 6 minutes for both question and answer. We'll begin with the Conservatives, with the first Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Gaudin. 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Béjean and Mr. Caron-Bélenfant. I think it's important to have you here this morning because you're a very significant factor in how we estimate eligibility, people who are eligible. In 2021, the census severely underestimated the number of children eligible for French language instruction outside Quebec and showed that no children were eligible for English language instruction in Quebec. In Ontario, 40% of those who would be eligible have no access to French language schools. Do you believe that these underestimations had a negative impact on Francophone children and minority language communities across Canada? Is my microphone on? That's an excellent question. Before the 2021 census, we had a question on mother tongue, which was put to everyone. So we didn't have the kind of data that would help us assess other criteria. We now have the kinds of questions that provide us with a full picture. So now we do have comprehensive data that show us a very detailed overall picture of children eligible for instruction in the minority official language. We also have other data sources on registration, for example, annual data that we've had for some time now to establish which percentage of the population is registered in minority instruction. We had data on trends, but as of 2021, we have been collecting more detailed information. So you're saying that since the 2021 census, you have a far more comprehensive picture that reflects a reality, because a lot of people worked hard to convince Statistics Canada to include questions. In 2020, when there was an Official Languages Act and Canadian Heritage, with the government's complicity, made it so that Stats Canada's obligation to produce actual numbers was not explicitly required. So how can you explain Canadian Heritage's position, since they seem to believe estimates are preferable to real numbers at the next census in 2031?
Mr. Chair, the position of Statistics Canada is we cannot comment on the intentions of our colleagues in other departments. What we can tell you, however, is that after every census, there is a consultation period concerning the content, the questions asked, be this of the users or political decision makers at the provincial level, federal level, and tests are done to test for new content or to make changes to the census content. So that is what Statistics Canada did in the last 2 years. We conducted 2 tests for the census. One was done in May, and one has just ended. That one was done in September. And these tests will give rise to analyses which will help regarding the determination for the next census. Are you telling me that this issue of number breakdown will be done in the next census? What I have said, Chair, is that census tests were done, and the content of these sets is available on the Statistics Canada website. And yes, for the tests, we added questions concerning children eligible in the minority language. So those tests were done. Thank you, Madame Béchamp. In fact, in your presentation, Madame Béchamp, you said that studies were done and you combined this with the sense. So this better defines the real picture of the situation of the minority official languages. Mr. Chair, as in any kind of analysis, combining, answer yes or no. Yes, it's a rich source of information. I'm limited in my time. Thank you. How much does a question cost when it's inserted in the census? I can give you the answer, 7 million, because Statistics Canada already asked my question on that. Now, is it worth to spend 7 million on that question to know who's entitled? And in Francophones and Anglophones in minority official language districts, don't they deserve that? Because all those, benefiting from those results are going to be paying 7 million just to insert the question in the census. An answer in 15 seconds, please. As I explained, the way we work to determine the content is we draw up a framework based on the needs of Canadians and also the political decision makers. So it's not necessarily tied in with the cost of a given question. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Now the second questions will come from the Liberal Party. Mr. Sanson. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. A few quick questions. What is the difference in the findings between past censuses and the 2021 census? What questions did this tell us about the people? Well, the questions that were added were questions on the language of instruction. I know that. What were the findings? It allowed us to get information on what population is admissible under the 3 criteria under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I appreciate, I'm short for time. What's the difference? What did we see that was different thanks to those questions? What it allowed planners to glean information. What type of information? The number of children who are eligible by locality. Are there many more? The number that had been estimated was 900,000, 600,000 outside of Quebec, 300,000 in Quebec. What was it before? Before we had no information on the 3 criterion in the Charter. So what's new? Well, it's a good question. We already had information on attendance, enrollment. So I'll move on. I don't have much time. Second question, what does data ecosystem mean? Can you explain? I know it's an important term. When we refer to data ecosystem, it means that it is a series of data, so we're able to go get additional information from other sources if we better understand the environment. Thank you for that answer. What type of analysis are you able to do with that ecosystem? Mr. Chair, as to the type of analysis, well, we've already disseminated some information, like the distance between the children's place of residence and the closest school of French language, or with the new study being done on parental intentions. Do parents have the intention to enroll their kids in a minority language school? And if so, for what reason? And if they have, for what reason? That's the type of analysis that can also be done. We're also preparing forecasts to be able to plan into the future, to be able to see the number of children admissible. That can help with the analysis that can be done as to eligible kids. So all of this is new. Excellent. Next question. The data on the kids of those who are entitled, do they meet the criteria established by case law for current demands as well as potential requests? Good question. The information we have is varied in the database. The kids that are entitled under the Canadian Charter of Rights and those who are actually already enrolled, and a number between the two, which the new survey will allow us, that is, amongst those who are eligible, what parents have the intention of enrolling the kids. So that could be a number between the total number entitled, because some parents might not be planning on enrolling their kids. So you'll have 3 different dimensions based on that data ecosystem. Now, the survey, is it one led by you or by Canadian Heritage? It will be a study on the minority language holders outside of Quebec and in Quebec, and that's Canadian Heritage, and it'll come out in December. So that'll give us exceptional data. Mr. Chair, I think I'll pass over to my colleague. Thank you, Chair. I would like to move my motion. I just wanted to raise my hand to tell you that I would like to raise my hand after my motion. I just want everyone to understand I've made my notice of motion. All right, then. Thank you, Chair. So I do want to table my motion that the committee expresses its disappointment at the behavior of Conservative MPs, notably the MP for Lethbridge and the MP for Brantford-Brant, towards Francophone ministers and toward the entirety of the Canadian population that speaks French, an official language of Canada. That the committee remind all MPs of their right to speak in whichever of the two official languages at all times in Parliament, that the committee requests that the MP for Brantford Brant apologize in the House to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, and to the 4,000 Franco-Ontarians in his riding, and to all Francophone MPs and Francophones in Canada, that the committee recognizes that French is just as important to Canada's bilingual status as English, and that French is indispensable to the Canadian identity, that the committee denounce the inaction of the Conservative leader in the face of repeated anti-Francophone remarks by his MPs. Mr. Chair, I would like to first remind my colleagues, and especially the members of the official opposition, Section 16 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that states in Section 1 that French and English are the official languages of Canada, and that they have equal status and privilege as to their use in the institutions such as the Parliament and institutions of Canada. And I see my colleague in front of me might be wondering why, and I just want to remind him that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms still exists, and it does speak to the official languages. I would also like to remind our colleagues that under the umbrella of Confederation, we have two founding nations, Francophone and Anglophone, and respect for Francophones is not optional in any way whatsoever. Last October 24th, after the MP from Brantford Brant asked his question to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, who answered his question in French, the MP from Brantford said to the Minister, and I quote, "The question is in English, but I digress." Now, it is the duty of any parliamentarian to respect our Constitution. And it is shameful that a Canadian elected representative rise in the House to criticize a minister who answers in French. I do not understand the inertia of the members of the opposition, be it the Bloc, the Conservatives, NDP, most particularly those elected from Quebec, the Franco-Ontarians, and the Acadians, given this gross insult that comes from the official opposition. And I hope that rather than protect their Conservative friends, and they will demand apologies from the Brantford Brant MP. It is the time to show your true colors and to show your unconditional respect for French in this chamber. Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you, Mr. Iacono. And I now have Gaudin, Sanson, and others on my list. Hands up. Go ahead, Mr. Gaudin. Mr. Chair, I don't want to lose my right to speak on the list, but is this motion in order? I would like thought to be given this because the power is being given to the committee to dictate the behavior of an MP in the House of Commons. So before we continue, perhaps you can consult your clerk, or maybe you already know the answer. Well, that's an excellent question, Mr. Gaudin. And when I read the motion, I gave thought to this. I referred back to Mr. Beaulieu's. You'll recall, from Glengarry. where it was the word demand, and were consequences. And of course, it was not in the powers of committee to impose any sanctions on anyone. And I had deemed that motion out of order, and even at that, the committee had not upheld my decision. So I'll explain the basis of my analysis based on something clear. I'm referring back into the past when I deemed Mr. Beaulieu's motion to be out of order. Now, in this case, I think the motion is in order, and I'll tell you why. It is not a motion that asks us to report to the court. I don't mean the court. I'm sorry. I mean to the House of Commons. Nor is it a motion that is requiring any sanctions or asking that anybody be expelled from any place, just like the motion that I referred to in the past did. We're asking here for someone to apologize, but we're not demanding that they be withdrawn from anything. It's recognizing that French is just as important, denounce the inaction of a leader, and all of this at the level of the committee without going any farther than this committee. Now, I prefer interpreting, the regulations in an open way, and in my opinion, this motion is in order. Did I answer your question? Yes and no. I know you're reading my nonverbal language. Now, Chair, I think that at this stage, and I have listened to your comment and your position, but at the outset, you simply said, you referred to an older motion, Prescott, Glangery, Prescott, I don't know the order in which, but we're talking about MP Drouin. And you made the decision that it was out of order. And then the committee decided otherwise. No, it was out of order on the basis of the regulation. A committee cannot sanction anyone. That is clear. But the committee did not uphold the chair and reverse the decision of the chair. And so the House has to deal with it. But your arguments, Chair, for your position on this motion that is on the table now, you said by way of introduction, you referred to this former motion. Well, I don't know if you know Lord Denning, but maybe Laura is around the table. But let's base ourselves on case law here. I have to make comparisons with the past to be as consistent as possible. Now, when there is a sanction against a colleague, I want to explain. This is the difference between the two motions. I've understood. But, Chair, to obligate an MP to apologize in the House is a sanction. So it's out of order, this motion, because there's a consequence. We're demanding here that there be a consequence. So, in theory, the decision of a chair is not debatable. There is a mechanism. If Mr. Godin wants to challenge you, there's a mechanism. I have resorted to that mechanism in the past. So this is not proper procedure, as I understand it. And this motion is not constraining. Thank you for bringing me to order. Yes, and thank you for that intervention because I think it was relevant. And I haven't finished, but I have made my decision. The motion is in order. Then I challenge your decision, Chair. And I ask and I appeal. I challenge your decision. So the Chair's decision, will it be upheld?
Monsieur Iacono?
Bien sûr.
Monsieur Lightbourne?
Oui.
Madame Koutrakis?
Oui.
Monsieur Sanson?
Absolument.
Monsieur Dalton,
Contre.
Monsieur Généreux,
Contre.
Monsieur Godin,
Contre.
Ouais.
C'est ça, excusez. Je te faisais d'autres choses, là. Excusez-moi.
Monsieur Cannings.
Merci.
Oups,
Ah, oui.
pardon. Toutes mes excuses, j'ai manqué Madame Gladou. Je suis désolée.
Vous m'avez manqué.
Non.
Ben, ouais, Madame Gladou. Ensuite, Monsieur Beaulieu.
Oui.
Donc, 6 pour maintenir la décision, 4 contre. Donc, la décision est maintenue. Monsieur Godin, vous m'aviez dit qu'après ça, vous vouliez continuer votre intervention.
Mr. Godin, that you said you wanted to continue. The decision has been upheld. Still on procedure, Chair, what I tried to do is put an end to the debate because we do have witnesses here. The study on the continuum of education is extremely important. We have, and the Conservative Party sponsor that motion. People around the table were receptive to it, and it was important. We had an opportunity, Chair, to speak together at the convention of the National Federation of Francophone School Boards. This is very important, and I ask that debate be adjourned.
Madame Greffière.
Donc, on vote sur l'ajournement du débat sur la motion.
The vote is on adjourning debate on the motion.
Je comprends pas qu'est-ce qui se passe.
Monsieur-
Oui, je sais qu'il y a un vote, mais
Le vote est sur. OK.
Pourquoi?
Le vote de M. Godin a été demandé.
I understand there's a vote. Mr. Godin asked that debate on the motion be adjourned. The vote is on that. I believe, Mr. Godin, that Mr. Iacono is speaking to the chair. The procedure requires an immediate vote with no further debate. All I've said is I don't understand what I'm voting on. Are you now going to begin educating all members? Mr. Iacono, on your point of order. I did certainly learn about education when I came here. As I look at my colleagues across the way that they play with procedure and make a game of it. So what I did today, what I presented today, they have done many times. And we have never done what they are doing now, which is shut down debate. Will you let me finish? I'm hearing all kinds of echoes. Point of order. If I don't understand what I'm voting on, I have a right to ask because, as you know, Chair, it is my motion. So, in fact, you're telling me indirectly that debate on my motion will be shut down. So I believe that is unfair. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Iacono. But what Mr. Godin is asking for is permissible under the rules of procedure. So now we do have to vote on whether we agree or do not agree to adjourn debate on your motion, on Mr. Iacono's motion. I do understand what you're saying, Mr. Iacono. Your question was what the vote was on? What Mr. Godin was asking? Correct. So is it clear to everyone what we are voting on? Please go ahead, Madam Clerk.
L'ajournement du
We are
débat.
voting on adjourning debate on the motion.
Monsieur Iacono,
vote.
Monsieur Lightbound,
Contre.
Madame Koutrakis,
Contre.
Monsieur Sanson,
Contre.
Monsieur Dalton,
Pour.
Monsieur Généreux,
Pour.
Monsieur Godin,
Pour.
Madame Gladu,
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu, Monsieur Cannings,
Contre.
Parfait. Donc, 6
Perfect.
7, pardon. 7-4, donc
7-4.
la demande d'adjournement est rejetée.
The
Donc, nous
request to
continuons
adjourn
avec
debate, the
Monsieur
motion to adjourn debate
Sanson.
is defeated.
Vous n'avez pas fini?
We will
Non, Monsieur
continue
le
with
Président, je
Mr.
vous ai-
Sanson. But I'm not done. I had 2 points of order. Please go ahead. Thank you, Chair. I would like to move an amendment to my colleague's motion. If you would give me a few seconds, I will move an amendment that the following be added to my colleague's motion, that the committee express its disappointment on the appointment by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of a Governor-General who does not speak French. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. We are debating my colleague's motion. We are in the process of debating my colleague's motion, and what my colleague from the opposition party is moving is a different motion. It's not really an amendment because it is substantively different and does not belong with this motion. Mr. Godin, could you please specify how you wish to amend that motion? If I may complete what I'm saying, in the spirit of what Mr. Sanson was saying, taken literally, it really is a change to the entire motion. No, this is being added. Yes, please be precise. That the committee express its disappointment on the behavior of the Conservative members towards Francophone government ministers and towards all Canadians who speak French, an official language of Canada. That the committee express its disappointment in the appointment of a Governor-General by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, of a Governor-General who does not speak French. That is being inserted. On the amendment, Mr. Iacono, I'm happy to be here because my colleagues across from me are providing an excellent education. To amend a motion, the amendment needs to have some kind of relationship to the motion, a link to the motion, and here I see no link to the amendment, between the amendment and the motion. I believe it should be deemed out of order. I also don't think it's a particularly good thing to have a Governor-General who does not speak French, but I do agree with Mr. Iacono that the amendment has no link to the motion before us. But I do appreciate that Mr. Godin read the motion, particularly that the committee expresses its disappointment at the behaviour of Conservative MPs, notably the MP for Lethbridge and the MP for Brantford, toward Francophone ministers and towards the entirety of the Canadian population that speaks French, an official language of Canada. Thank you for reading that. It's good to hear it. It's what we did not hear in the House. We had a lot of Francophone members of Parliament saying that ministers, French-speaking ministers answering in French should certainly not be challenged on that. So I would invite Mr. Godin to reread this motion as many times as he would like to. On the amendment, Mr. Généreux, then Ms. Gladue. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We should bear in mind the effects of this. Our colleague, the member for Brantford-Brant, put a question. And Mr. Duclos, the Minister Duclos, answered in French. My colleague did not have his, well, what do you call it? No, I'm trying to set out the facts. This is what happened. He didn't have his earpiece. So he was not able to hear the answer properly, understand the answer properly. His intent was absolutely not to correct the minister or upbraid him for not having answered, for having answered in French. He repeated what had actually happened. And that said, the member for Brantford Brant apologized after question period. Mr. Généreux, may I interrupt you? We're on the amendment. Yes, but this is important because all these considerations are a part of it. Yes, and I'm coming to the amendment. He apologized, and Mr. Duclos accepted his apologies. So the member's intent was not to say, we don't want an answer in French. But that said, within the motion, members are being asked to apologize in the House. And what Mr. Gaudin added as an amendment was a request for the Prime Minister to apologize for appointing a Governor-General who does not speak French. Mr. Iacono was talking or mentioned the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are in a bilingual country, and your Prime Minister appointed someone for whom I have otherwise tremendous respect, who doesn't speak a word of French. So, one moment, I have a point of order. Please don't forget what you're about to say. Please go ahead, Mr. Iacono. I understand what my colleague is saying, and I'm not saying his comments are wrong, but this motion refers to an event which took place in the House of Commons. It does not refer to the appointment of a Gunner-General. What is the point of order? Mr. Gaudin, you know what to do. Please raise your hand, as everyone should. I'm much more permissive than I am restrictive. I do call colleagues to order when I have to, but let's let Mr. Iacono finish his thought. First of all, I'd like to apologize to our witnesses for wasting their time here. Chair, you provide instructions at the beginning of every meeting on how members are to take the floor so that our interpreters don't have difficulty. So when a member speaks at the same time as another, what is going to happen? Could you please, once and for all, tell the member to let other members speak, and he will have his chance to take the floor. If I did that when he was speaking, I don't think he'd be all that pleased. A little respect, not for other members, because there is none, but at least for the interpreters. I am now saying to all members here today that the acoustic accidents are not caused solely on Zoom, but by people around the table. That is where most accidents are happening. So please, raise your hand, shake your hand if you don't think I've seen it. But acoustic accidents are coming from this table here and not from people who are joining us virtually. So please, let's be careful. Mr. Iacono, please complete your point of order. My motion is on an event that took place in the House of Commons. It does not pertain to nominations, appointments, be it of a Governor-General, be it of a judge. It has a bearing on an event that occurred on October 24th. It has no bearing on any appointments. And when I refer to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I am referring to the Charter in relation to the event that occurred in the House of Commons, not anything that happened outside it. All members have the right to speak and answer in the official language of their choice. There are two official languages in Canada, and on that day, a member of the opposition party demonstrated a lack of respect not only towards his colleagues of all parties, but towards all Canadians. If we do not move this motion here at this committee, where would we move it? We are here to defend the rights of Francophones, and I am a proud Quebecer. I was born in Quebec, of Italian parents, but born in Quebec. I learned French. I studied law in French. After having completed my studies at McGill in English, my son speaks French. He goes to a French bilingual school. So if we don't bring that motion forward here at this committee, as my colleagues do, if we cannot advance the rights of Francophones here, where else? This motion is being blocked by the Conservatives. They are simply blocking access to French. And where? In Canada's Parliament. I am ashamed of that. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Généreux, yes, you're still on the list. I'm going to go all the way to Ms. Gladue. I want to hear everybody on the amendments being in order. Mr. Généreux had the floor. Am I included? You were the very first. Mr. Iacono and Mr. Lightbound have spoken. And then Ms. Gladue. Oh, and Mr. Sanson is there as well. After Ms. Gladue, it's Mr. Sanson. And I can also add Mr. Lightbound and Mr. Généreux on that point.
Moi qui soulève le point après Mme Gladue, vous mettez après.
So you're putting my name last? No, I already had Mr. Sanson after Mr. Gladue. Do you and the clerk have the same list? Yes, he raised his hand at the same time as you. There are too many people speaking at once, unfortunately.
Okay. Monsieur Généreux n'a pas fini.
Mr. Gaudin, I have a list, and Mr. Généreux has not finished, so we'll go back to him. Then it's Ms. Gladue, then Mr. Sanson, Mr. Lightbound, Mr. Gaudin, and Mr. Dalton. Is that your decision, Chair? I will respect it. Can we now hear Mr. Généreux on the amendment moved by Mr. Gaudin? Thank you, Chair. Out of respect for the interpreters, I waited quietly until it was my turn to speak, so now I have the floor. I would invite my colleagues to, well, how can I put it? To loosen up a bit.
Let the witnesses go. This seems to be, the Conservatives seem to be wanting to drag this out completely, and I don't want to keep them here, unnecessarily. I just find this is, unacceptable. But
Je regarde tous les visages autour de la table. Messieurs et dames.
I'm looking at all the faces around the table. We will allow our witnesses to leave. We thank you for having come.
Merci d'être là.
Monsieur Godin.
Thank you for having joined us today. Mr. Généreux, please go ahead. Chair, I believe that the comments made by our colleagues across the way are not necessary. But that's what's happening. Well, I could myself comment on what our colleagues have done and said in the House. I think there's a lack of respect towards witnesses, Mr. Chairman. Could you please bring our colleague across the table to order?
Des langues officielles.
This is the Official Languages Committee. I will have to be more strict. We are on the amendment. What's happening here is going a little too far. We are on the amendment. Mr. Généreux, I will hear you on the amendment, and those on the rest of my list, I will hear you on the amendment. Mr. Gaudin's amendment inserted the following after the first paragraph, that the committee expresses its disappointment that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has appointed a Governor General who does not speak French. Mr. Généreux, on that amendment. As far as I know, in Canada, there's only one Charter of Rights and Freedoms that is federal. We have only one parliament. It is a parliament that belongs to all of us, and decisions made in that parliament are valid for speakers and for appointments. So I completely agree that Mr. Gaudin's amendment can be added. Disappointment in the fact that the Prime Minister appointed a Governor General who does not speak French. That is just as damaging for all Canadians.
And for the opportunity to speak. So, while I think it's awful that they put in place a Governor General that doesn't speak French, I think it doesn't add to the context that we have. Everyone knows that you can speak English or French in the House, and I try, when French questions are directed at me, to try to reply in French unless I run out of vocabulary, in which case I switch over. But I want to say also that Mr. Brock knows, because he did apologize that day to Mr. Leclos, and he did go on Twitter and social media and apologize as well, which affects all of what has been put before us. I just want to read it into the record. I want to apologize to Mr. Duclos and all my colleagues for my comments in question period today. Every member of Parliament has the right to speak in the official language of their choice. My comment was inappropriate, and I am sorry. And to make it better, he did it in French. Je tiens à m'excuser auprès du ministre du...
I apologize to Minister Duclos and all my colleagues for the comments made during today's question period. Every member of Parliament is entitled to speak in the official language of their choice, and my comment was inappropriate.
We've all done errors. We've seen in the past where Sean Fraser was putting ministerial things out in unilingual. He apologized, and he's done much better to learn his French and to move along. I think in the spirit of working better as a committee, we should just skip the amendment and skip the motion.
Monsieur Sanson.
Mr. Sanson, I just want to say that the proposed amendment is unacceptable. It completely changes the main motion. It's completely different. And, Chair, I would like you to rule on that. I believe the amendment is totally different. I mean, we could start introducing amendments of that ilk henceforth. Now, this amendment changes completely what unfolded in the House. So I ask you to rule against the amendment. There are still people who want to speak to the amendment. If there's, and I'm willing to listen to this. I would rather speak to the motion rather than the amendment. The amendment is out of order. It has nothing to do with the substance of the motion. In fact, there was another motion that was notified exactly on this topic. I mean, otherwise we can, we can continue to add amendments ad nauseum. So I will stick to my list. If there's anything new, Mr. Gaudin, you're next on my list. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think we have to correct certain facts stated around this table. My colleague who sponsored the motion, which I've amended. Point of order. We are debating an amendment that is out of order, and if it's the case, rule that. I would like to have talked about the motion, but I could not because we're debating the amendment, an amendment which I think is out of order. I do need to take a decision. It is true. Mr. Gaudin, hold on a minute. I've said this 3 times. Is there anything I've not yet heard that could influence my decision? Mr. Godin, because the amendment I deem out of order. You yourself tabled a notice of motion, which is just the same as your amendment. But that doesn't discredit an amendment. If I can make headway, no, but Mr. Iacono's motion is regarding a specific day, a specific incident that happened in the House. That's my reading of the motion. So expresses disappointment in the behavior of Conservative MP. And Ms. Gladue even shared with us the apologies, and all of this happens in the House. The amendment, I'm going to rule on right away. I would like us to move on. Mr. Chair, before ruling, I do have an element that is very important and that might go ahead. In the motion, it is stated, and you talked, about actions in the House. So where did the MP from Lethbridge, state what was stated? So I could ask the author of the motion to explain. Now, I have ruled that the amendment is not in order in the context of the motion. Is this a point of order? No. The amendment is out of order, and I'm on the speaker's list to speak to the motion. Are you starting a new list? No, I'm still on the amendment list. Now, I rule the amendment out of order. It's out of order. That's clear? Can we now go back to the motion? No, I have not given you the floor. I have had my hand. Well, thanks to Mr. Lightmount for chairing this meeting. Here is the list on the motion. Mr. Sanson, Lightmount, Serré, Beaulieu, Godin, Gladue. I can add. This was my list before the amendment. I had my hand up before the amendment. My name should be on that list. That's okay. That's okay. We'll add your name. Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair? No, I was on the list, on the motion list, and also on the amendment list. But you ruled the amendment out of order. But I was on the motion speakers list before these others. You went for Mr. Godin, then a few other people. I think I was number 5. So I don't know why my name has been skipped. You all right, Mr. Dalton. I'm going to combine my list with the clerks, Sanson, Lightbound, Serré, Beaulieu. And then I had Dalton, Iacono, and then Godin, Gladue. That's better. Very well. So we're trying to do our best here, and we, Mr. Sanson, you are the first now. Go ahead. I will not speak at length because I think we should be voting rather than arguing. But I have to say that I was stupefied to hear the comments made by the MP, because it's the second time this happens from the same party, a party which supposedly stands for protecting the official languages. So I was disappointed. It was an attack on my identity and my choice, and I'm very proud of bilingualism in Canada. And when I hear these kinds of things, it's hurtful. And it was hurtful for Mr. Duclos. And I ask that we vote as quickly as possible so that we can continue our work. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. Mr. Lightbound. Thank you, Chair. Regarding the motion before us, I understand the discomfort of the Conservatives who want to do anything but talk about what happened in the House last Thursday, because what we observed last Thursday echoes years of contempt and of the MPs. I myself experienced it when I was Parliamentary Secretary for Finance, and one day I'd answered in French because it's my mother tongue and I'm entitled to speak in French. And I saw it in their looks and in their size. So year and year after year, we see these kinds of comments in the House, and we know that even Mr. Généreux would like us to think the opposite. We know exactly what he was trying to do and insinuate about Mr. Duclos, who is a Francophone, who should have answered him in English because the question was posed in English. That is shameful. And then he tried to wiggle out of it with apologies, which weren't even apologies in the House. And then he resorted to Twitter. Now, Ms. Gruder is right. It can be a human thing. And Mr. Duclos accepted the apologies. He's real classy. Nonetheless, I think we have to condemn that kind of conduct. And I mean, that didn't just fall from the sky. For years, we've seen that kind of conduct on the part of Conservatives. And what upsets me is that my Francophone colleagues from the other side of the House not be capable every once in a while, when the error is in their camp, to pull up their socks and admit that that is not the way we should treat Francophones. So I think the motion is entirely relevant. It's not constraining, and I think it should be up to the committee to talk about what happened last Thursday. That committee members, hold official languages to heart. Thank you, Mr. Lightbound. Mr. Serré. Chair, I just want to follow up on what Mr. Lightbound has said and point out that first, Mr. Brock's conduct was in the chamber, so it concerns the chamber. And apologies by way of Twitter is not an apology. And it's actual complete hypocrisy. Mr. Drouin, made a mistake in this committee, apologized to this committee and in the media on numerous occasions, and the motion from the Conservatives was never withdrawn. So I have, trouble understanding the total hypocrisy of Conservatives here. Another point, we should remember that one of our Conservative colleagues in Quebec, Mr. Berthold, made comments regarding Madame de Boutillier and saying that she should be speaking in English. And we know Diane, and her comments are very important. There's a Quebecer who told another Quebecer to speak in English. So I think there's a pattern here. And I think we can all be in agreement to accept the motion and continue the work we do here in this committee. And the earlier comment made by Mr. Généreux, that the earpiece was not working, I think that's a very weak argument. And I'm being kind, putting it in those words. I mean, he can, move a point of order. It's often done in the House. My listening device isn't working. Could you please repeat So I don't understand that argument made here. So I do believe we should go ahead with a vote. There have been precedents, and I think all we're doing with this motion, we're not asking for this to go back to the House. I mean, it's not like what the Conservatives wanted in regard to Mr. Drouin, that to go and waste the time of the House. No, all we're asking here to Mr. Brock to just go back to the House and apologize to Mr. Duclos. And we move on to something else. Thank you, Mr. Serré, Mr. Beaulieu. We have lost the time of our witnesses from Statistics Canada. I had 2 motions waiting. Now, I hadn't moved them. Maybe we could have waited for our witness to testify and then turned to our motions, but not at all. Mr. Iacono went ahead. So we were not able to ask questions of our witnesses. I believe that's deplorable. Mr. Dalton. I agree with Mr. Beaulieu. We could have waited just a few more minutes, and we could have had a discussion with our witnesses. And it would have been a very important conversation. Now, with this motion, the MP in question clearly apologized in the House. And Chair, you have it already settled in the case of Mr. Drouin that the committee does not have the power to oblige an MP to apologize in the House. Now, there is one part of the motion that the committee recognizes that French is just as important to Canada's bilingual status as English, and that French is indispensable to the Canadian identity. And I have to say that I am entirely in agreement with that. It is important. The French language, we're not talking here about tradition, but the French language is very important for us as a country and who we are as a country. And for me, it's something very personal. I make every effort all the time in the House of Commons to ask or respond to questions in French, and I encourage colleagues to speak in French. Even those who are just learning the language. It is very important to me. So I'm not going to say, well, it's an affront to say the Conservatives are opposed to the French language, and this is the evidence. It's clearly not the case. I know my colleagues, and I believe that the majority, or at least a large number of MPs in Parliament, are making efforts to study French. And it is important for us. So the wording in the motion is indispensable to the Canadian identity. And this is true, So French is a part of who we are. And it is one of the reasons I am opposed to the Bloc Québécois that says we are a nation, and we are the nation of Quebec, where we have a majority of Francophones. So the chamber has suspended proceedings. There are no votes. I have a question. Can the committee then continue to sit? Well, if we begin before the bells, unless the clerk contradicts me, yes, we can continue. I apologize, Mr. Dalton. I just wanted to reassure the members. All right, I'll take my time. Listen, It's a big effort for me to speak in French, but I am going to seize the opportunity. Listen, we listened to Mr. Serré and the story he recounted about Mr. Serré's family. And on a number of occasions, we've heard about, Mr. Sanson's story and the, 1450 wars. It's very interesting. We didn't fall asleep too deeply. We did try to listen. It was interesting. So now it is my turn. We can talk a little bit about our own personal stories and how French is really important to us as individuals. I mean, we are members of Parliament. We are Conservative members of Party. So I will continue. You can take out your pillows. If you're speaking in French, I can listen to you forever, and we congratulate you. And you do a good job. Someone is always going to say, well, it doesn't fit with the motion. And I can say right away that the motion talks about Canadian identity. So all of my remarks are on Canadian identity, and I support that. And so my comments should be appreciated by everyone here. So the Runners of the Wood, those were francophones. They spoke French. Point of order.
Oh, please.
Monsieur Dalton.
I very much appreciate Mr. Dalton's comments, but they shouldn't be addressed to us on the committee. They should be addressed to his colleague, the member for Brantford Brent. In 10 seconds, I was about to show what the link was. Clearly, Mr. Lightbound was not here because he's missed a lot. I do ask for some patience, please. Mr. Dalton, I haven't even begun. Yes, and we all remember the episode you're referring to, but I will always call the member to order to say this is what the motion is on, and we do need to maintain some relevance.
Indispensable à l'identité canadienne.
A motion indispensable to Canadian identity. That is the point I'm focusing on. The coureurs de bois in the forest. I know some of them were Scottish, but they were mostly francophones, and they were in all parts of the interior, at the Red River. And that's important. You know why? Because it's there on the Red River that a new people came to be. Marc Serré, isn't this history? The Métis. He's proud, and so am I. I'm a proud Métis. My roots go back to the Red River and the colony that formed there on my grandfather's side. They carried on exploring. They carried on with trade and beaver pelts. They discovered, well, not discovered, but opened and peopled Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. Not just that. They also, the French francophone coureurs de bois, went as far as British Columbia. If you go to Fort Langley, are you taking a photo of me, Mr. Iacono? Fort Langley was the first capital of British Columbia. But it's the Francophone coureurs de bois who were there. This is really close to the river where I live, close to the French-Canadian colonies. All Western provinces had many French Canadians in them. So this is very much a part of who we are as a people. I agree with that part of the motion. I'm not in agreement with all of it, but with that part of it, certainly. And let's remember Louis Riel and the connection between Quebec and the communities around the Red River. We fought for the right to speak French, to be educated, schooled in French, and that is something we are continuing to do. Here, we unite all political parties. We're all here. We're here, the Bloc is here, the Liberals are here, the NDP is here, and we're all here because we want to keep and protect and help to flourish the rights of Francophones and Francophiles, those who speak French and those who love French. We want them all to flourish. We want to see them thrive, grow. We want opportunities. We've had meetings and studies on trade. We want people who are able to conduct business in French. We want people in schools who speak French, and that is so important because French is an island. We are a Francophone island in an Anglophone ocean, and it's very important to us to preserve this jewel. It is a jewel. It is marvelous to see French language and culture thrive. It's a jewel, and it makes us really, sets us apart from the United States. Quebec is a jewel, but not just Quebec, though that is very important. I'm also talking about French and the French language and Francophones across Canada. This is personal for me to some extent because I am Métis. My mother is a Baudouin, so we can trace our lineage back to 1640 when the first Baudouins were in the region of Quebec City. If I had more time, I would look at our genealogy in greater detail because it's fascinating. At the beginning of the last century, around 1910 or so, like all families, the Baudouins had very large families. And since everyone worked primarily in farms, most people worked on farms, we didn't have enough land for everyone. So people from there started to go elsewhere so that they could make a life for themselves in farming. The family moved, or some members of the family moved to Amos, around Val d'Or, and the family kept growing. My grandmother, Alice Baudouin, had 18 children. 18 children. They decided to move to Kapuskasing. I am still on the subject of Canadian identity. I'm speaking as a Conservative. I'm speaking as someone to whom this is tremendously important. I'm happy to see some elements of this motion. They moved to Kapuskasing and remained there for quite some time. Not all children were born there, but around 1941, with their very large family, where did they decide to go? To Peace River. They moved to the Peace River region. I don't know if other members have had an opportunity to visit, but there are many small communities that were established in the 1930s, 1940s, villages like Falaise, villages like Juriville, Jussor. Many communities were founded, not just there, but in other places too. If you go to Saskatchewan, you'll find Gravobourg. There are many communities everywhere. And this is important, Chair, because what we're seeing now, where earlier there were once large families, and we had a Francophone society, there was French in all parts of the country, but with inventions and progress and families that became ever smaller. A point of order, Chair. Point of order. I think we are moving away from the topic. This is all very interesting. I think I will send this to his colleague Larry Brock because he needs to see how important it is. However, when it comes to the motion that is before us today, it's hard to see how Mr. Dalton's comments relate to it. Mr. Dalton, that the country recognize that French is as important and essential to Canadian identity. I believe Mr. Dalton has been focusing on the Canadian identity. We are not on our first discussion on motions. Shall we put it that way? That's quite true. Very educational. It's all very educational. But I confess that it's very interesting to hear about what the Coureurs de Bois did. Well, it's certainly important for Western Canada. This is a part of the history of French language and culture in Canada. Our nationality is being described. This is part of who we are. I'm talking about my mother and the Baudouin family. What we're discussing here is that things are becoming increasingly difficult. Francophones are leaving small communities. They're going into the larger cities like Vancouver and other metropolitan areas. So we need to have a vision of how we can help them, how we can help and support this culture. We need to provide opportunities for them to speak French, to have French-speaking communities. This is directly important for French in Canada. So my mother's family was from the Baudouin lineage. My father's last name was, yes, Dalton, as you might have guessed. And that's interesting because the first Dalton families were in the Montreal region around 1760. Edward Dalton was born before the English conquest. The Montreal invasion was in 1761. And we wonder how that is even possible. However, the Irish did not have a very profound appreciation of the English at the time. Basically, the Irish and English did not get on. So the Irish felt more drawn to the French. There's even a Dalton Street. Perhaps Montreal members know where that is, and if you cross that street or walk down it, you can think about my family. I am still on the subject of Canadian identity, Chair. This is very personal to me. Point of order. I just want to understand, Chair, how this is related to Mr. Brock's motion on Canadian identity. I think Mr. Brock might need some education. This does relate to the motion. I believe that Mr. Dalton is on the motion. He's explaining why the motion is important to him and why he believes it's important for the committee to vote for it. Another point of order. This is very interesting, what Mr. Dalton is saying. But if I read the second last paragraph, you talk about Canadian identity, but in my view, we're not trying to establish Canadian identity in the House of Commons. What we're trying to do is make a point on something that happened in the House of Commons, something that was disrespectful towards all members and all Canadians, particularly Francophone Canadians, the way that a member rose in the House and told another member that the way in which he answered wasn't suitable in his view because it wasn't in English. I very much appreciate all your comments, but I think that what is relevant here is what was done and said in the House itself. I know that I'm up next, Chair, and I will wait to be given the floor. I just wanted to explain my view of the nuances here. Many things are being said, but we are moving away from the facts, which is what happened on that day in that place. Canadians are listening to us, and I do believe it's important to bring the debate back to what happened on that day. It's not an issue of Canadian identity. Canadians know what Canadian identity is. They're well aware. What we need to be talking about is what happened on that day. And that's why I moved my motion. We are engaged in debate, and the tradition, as tenuous as it might be, is this. When somebody refers in some way to tradition, to the motion, the tradition is to let them carry on. What I have done before is if things were being repeated, then I would perhaps ask the member to stop. But Mr. Dalton is referring to a very specific paragraph in your motion. He's in fact saying that he agrees with much of it, and everything he's saying does touch on Canadian identity. So I will let Mr. Dalton finish. After that, there is a list of speakers. I am talking about the motion. I'm talking about one part of it. Then I could speak to another part of it. I do thank Mr. Iacono for his patience. My father, from the Dalton family, had another form of evolution. They were in the St. Albert region. My father was born in Villeneuve. Not my father, an ancestor of his. He was born in Villeneuve, and he met my mother in a small village near Slave Lake. She was a teacher. They married. My father was in the Canadian Armed Forces. He signed on during the Korean War and remained in the Army for 36 years. There is a point that's important here when it comes to national identity. He was in the Canadian Armed Forces, stationed in Ballinzoligan. It's a Canadian base. And that's where I was born. I was born in Germany, West Germany, in Bad Solingen. Is that part of Canadian identity? No, I'm talking about the Canadian forces and of my own history, because I'm a Canadian and my own identity. I'm talking about that. That's where I was born. My first language was French. It was French. It may not show much now, but until I was 3, I spoke French. I did not speak German or English. I believe my colleagues are taking notes.
So what happened? Well, the Canadian Armed Forces is not just English-speaking. There are French-speaking military who fought in World War II. We're getting close to November 11th. So the Francophone Canadian soldiers fought in the battlefield. And I agree with that part of the motion. One moment, please. We would like to do a sound test with Ms. Ashton. Go ahead, Ms. Ashton. Good morning. I can hear you. All well. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is it okay? We're going to accept it? So I was in the House, Canadian Heritage, all well. We can hear you. So let's continue with Mr. Dalton's excellent intervention on Mr. Iacono's motion. So I was talking about battlefields during the war where English Canadians and French Canadians and Indigenous Canadians, I am a Métis, as I've told you, gave of their lives for our country. They gave their lives for our country. They fought to defend our values, including our linguistic duality, the fact that we are a Francophone and Anglophone country with 2 official languages. And you will recall, Chair, that in 1762, Wolfe and the battle in Quebec City, well, the English conquered New France. But let us not forget that only a few years later, 1776, to the south, you had the Revolutionary War in the United States. And the Americans offered to New France that they join them and push out the British. But what happened? The Francophones realized that their language, their religion was much better protected under the British than under the Americans. Great Britain gave them a great deal of choice. So they had a choice. They could have joined the United States, but what they did, they fought against the Americans. You know yourselves the battle sites not far away from Montreal or from Quebec City. Now, Mr. Dalton, I'm going to bring you back to, and I'm still talking about the Canadian identity. Mr. Chair, it is key. It is key to our identity, and this for hundreds of years. So I am trying to show the importance that we conservatives give. The importance we give to the French language. We're being told that we're not in favor of the French language. It's not true at all. It's like saying you are not Canadians, because the French language is part and parcel of who we are as Canadians. Now, I was talking to you about the Canadian military. We have regiments like the Vendus, the Vendus, based in Quebec City. My dad was also stationed in Quebec City, but also in Chibougamau. And I was telling you, when I was 3, we moved to a base not far from London, to Clinton. And my dad was undergoing training. And what happened? The children spoke English, and they made fun of me because I could not understand them, because I could not speak English. And I recall the conversation between my mom and my dad, which was, well, let's speak in English with Mark. And that was a decision that my mother regretted for many years to come, because I lost my French. So how is it that I can now speak French, at least a bit? Well, we were transferred to a base in Alberta, and also north of Vancouver, and then to Chibougamau. And I was a teenager, and my mother tried to force me to speak French. I didn't want to. I was a teenager, and she put me with family, with relatives in Kapuskasing that spoke only French. But I put up a great deal of resistance. And I remember talking a lot to U.S. tourists, and my parents were rather annoyed with me because I didn't learn much. In Chibougamau, I attended an Anglophone Catholic school. It was, and when I was at the Polyvalente, I was put in that French school, and I was not happy. That lasted 1 or 2 days, and then I returned to the English-speaking school. I was always very competitive. I wanted to perform at school. I wanted to be the best. I competed against my sister, Danielle. That's another story. She's become a judge. Maybe another time I'll tell that story, but it does not tie in with the motion, and I want to respect the motion. So what happened next? Well, French was my weakest subject, and I even failed 1 year because everybody else in my class in Chibougamau, spoke French, and I had been put in that class. And in any event, life goes on. And, then I did my high school. I traveled to Mexico. I even stayed there a few months. And there I found myself needing to speak Spanish. And then I started to speak Spanish. And in Mexico, I started getting a taste for learning other languages. I started to realize the merit in studying other languages. And I made a decision. I'm going to start studying French. And I took correspondence courses. And then after that, I attended Simon Fraser University, and I wanted to become a teacher. So I became a history teacher and a French teacher. Can you believe it? My mother, French is a second language. Poor kids. So I was a teacher for a number of years. 7 years in a high school teacher, then 7 years at the elementary levels, and I was elected as a provincial MP. I lost my elections, and I went back to my high school where I taught before, and I taught 8th and 9th and 10th grade, and all French classes, French as a second language, mind you. Now, for me, what is most important is the following. I wanted my students to have a positive experience. Because all too often they're caught up in how to conjugate verbs. I wanted to give them an opportunity to communicate, to have fun, to really learn to enjoy the French language and have the desire to appreciate French, just as we do here, to try to encourage the citizens of the country to learn French. We want that to flourish here. It's very important. And you know full well, Chair, that French is indeed extremely important. And as a teacher, I witness so many students attend immersion, French immersion, and it was my desire in the study we are conducting now that we actually address the issue of French immersion more. I think that's a shortcoming because I do believe that, you can therefore encourage the vitality of French outside Quebec because schools have taken up that role. I mean, it used to be the churches, but now the focus is on the schools. And for the study we're conducting now, on this minority language education continuum, I think we need to be addressing the early childhood years. The study is very important. I think that we should either add another study but at least address immersion. And here I'm talking about the importance of the Canadian identity. With our immersion programs, we have, so I'm just read a note. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to just take a little break, have a sip of water, and give the floor to my colleague, Marilyn, with your permission. Now, there's somebody before Madame Gladue. There's Mr. Godin. First, Mr. Iachonu. Maybe I'll be able to continue my story another day. Mr. Iachonu. Thank you, Chair. I would like to clarify this committee is holding its proceedings in public, and no doubt Canadians are wondering what we are doing. So I want to allude to some comments made after the event. Unfortunately, they are in English in reference to the CBC, but it's an exact quote of my colleague's comments vis-a-vis the minister regarding the fact that the minister had answered in French. Let me quote.
Tout d'abord, rising on a point of order, after question period, Brock said, non, je vais aller avec celui-là plutôt avant. What we just, Duclos qui dit, what we just heard is an insult to all Francophone MPs in this House, including Conservatives MPs, Duclos said in French. He later called on Brock to apologize. Rising on a point of order, after question period, Brock said he wasn't able to hear Duclos' response. Because, thank you for admitting that, because of commotion in the House. He states, my volume wasn't working correctly on my headpiece. That's why I made the reference, Brock said. Clearly, I recognize that every member in this House is entitled to respond and ask questions in both official languages. Speaking to CBC News outside the House, Duclos said Brock's excuse was very poor. And I guess this is what led me to bring this motion forward. Because I feel, based on what I'm going to be saying after this, that everything concludes to the conclusion that the Francophones are not respected by the allophones in the House of Commons, especially from the opposition party. Yet, we have colleagues from the opposition party that pronounce and confirm that they're defending the rights of the French Canadians. But yet, at that present moment in the House of Commons on the 24th of October, and I'm sure Canadians can go back and watch the video, that exact episode, when the comments were made and when the minister got up and responded back to him, there was not a single soul of Conservative MPs that got up or that made a comment. And that also goes for other members of other parties. And I know that some of my colleagues across were present, and I know who wasn't present. And yet today we are hearing from the ones that weren't present conclusions that their colleague, Mr. Brock, excused himself. Well, I'd like to let Canadians know that Mr. Brock never excused himself correctly in the House of Commons. He made allusion to remarks of excusing himself. And if I read a little further down here, I regret to say it's contempt for, this is Mr. Duclos saying this. I regret to say it's contempt for the fundamental choice that we have as MP, including Francophone MPs, to express ourselves in the language of our choosing. And as you can see, Mr. President, I have a big connection to what the motion is all about, right? So I will continue. In my case, my choice is French. I don't always have the words that come to me easily in English, Minister Duclos said. I think he should apologize. Maybe he said it without thinking, but it's up to him to say, going forward. Later on social media platform, X, formerly known as Twitter, Brock apologized in both languages, stating, I want to apologize to Minister Duclos and all my colleagues for my comments in question period today. Every member of Parliament has the right to speak in the official language of their choice. My comment was inappropriate, and I'm sorry. That's beautiful. But let it be known to Canadians, and let it be known in this committee room, that an apology in person has yet to be made. And Mr. President, I have to say that amongst the members that are here, there are two of us that are privileged. You know why? Because the two of us were sitting just behind the Minister Duclos. Therefore, we can see and hear without our earpieces what he says and what he responds, correct? But we're also even more privileged to say, Mr. President, is that, Mr. Chair, that MP Lightbound and I, who sit 2 seats apart, were just facing our esteemed colleague of the Conservative Party when he answered his question and when he responded ungraciously to the minister with his comments. So we saw his actions of wrongdoing. And to the greatest surprise, because you heard me cite here before, right? He stated, my volume wasn't working correctly on my headpiece. That's why I made the reference. Wow. Well, you know something, Mr. Chair? He wasn't wearing an earpiece when all this happened. He wasn't wearing, because every member in the House of Commons that has a problem with their earpiece, just like our colleague did before, or like our other colleagues have done in the past, right away, when they can't hear translation or they can't hear somebody speaking, right away they make sign to the Speaker of the House. So he wasn't wearing an earpiece. So how can he make such comments to the media? How can he get up in the House of Commons and conclude in front of Canadians that his earpiece was malfunctioning when he didn't have it to start with? So that's even more insulting to the French-speaking people. And not only that, sir, Mr. Chair, somebody of his team came to get him and bring him into the lobby so he can come back calmly and make somewhat of an apology. There was no apology done, Mr. Chair, because my esteemed colleague Joel and I were present in front of him. The apology was done in the air. It wasn't done to Mr. Duclos. And this is what the motion is talking about, that apology should be made. And I would like if my colleague across would let me...
Chair, point of order. Point of order. Point of order. Mr. Chair, I have a point of order. Everyone stop.
Règlement, j'arrête momentanément pour écouter et je reviens à vous.
So when there's a point of order, I stop. Mr. Godin, go ahead.
Mr. Godin, since 2015, I've been here, as has my colleague. He should know procedure. It is 1 p.m., and we ask that the meeting be suspended, that this debate be suspended or postponed until the next meeting. I had an amendment to move, but I didn't have an opportunity. If I might take a few seconds. What I did last time was, by unanimous consent, to adjourn in order to go back at the next meeting to exactly where we were on the same list. We will start exactly where we are at the next meeting, as if we had suspended. It is better to adjourn for technical reasons. On my list, Mr. Iacono, who can finish, Mr. Godin, Ms. Gladu, and I think Ms. Ashton had her hand raised. Is that so, Ms. Ashton? No, fine. Mr. Iacono will finish his comments, then Mr. Godin, then Ms. Gladu. We will adjourn, but we'll start again exactly where we left off. Thank you.